Hello, welcome to the fourth video of the Beginner's Guide to Art Fundamentals. I'm Forrest Emmel, and I'm the guy that's going to be having kind of a one-sided conversation with you for the next hour and a half or so. And today, I'm going to be talking about color. So what is color? It's a phenomenon where an object receives a spectrum of light summarized to Roy G. Biv and reflects a particular color of the spectrum back into our eyes. But what does color mean to us as artists? Well, in my opinion, its primary purpose in painting is to help emphasize the emotional impact of the painting itself. Nothing makes a rainy day feel more dreary than combining it with kind of a grayish blue, and nothing makes a scene feel more powerful and full of action than a good red or orange. Colors can give our brains a natural subconscious reaction to them. They make us feel a certain way that we can't always explain. All we can say is that we feel a certain way about it. And while some people's feelings towards one color may be different from another person's, there are some general theories and rules that kind of make it easier for us as an artist to help give someone that nudge towards a specific emotion. Most of these fundamental videos have a breakdown of subcategories. Color is a little bit different. There are rules and definitions within color theory that could count as a subcategory, but is more of a portion of color that you simply learn to consider on top of everything else. Things like hue, saturation, color temperature, etc. They're parts of a bigger theory and they're interchangeable. It's a theory that we'll go into pretty deeply throughout the video. If you watched the episode on values already, you'll know that when I discuss the form principle, there are parts of it that can fluctuate, but not parts that can be changed or moved. Color is a lot more ambiguous and theoretical. When a painting in absolute black and white can make us feel a certain emotion, even being devoid of all color, then what's the use of color other than to emphasize that emotion? Which brings us to our first talking point: values versus colors. Values, the brightness and darkness of a particular subject, and color, the portion of a spectrum that is being reflected off of an object and sent shooting into our eyeballs. It sounds so attractive like that. In the episode prior to this one, I discussed how values are what help give something three-dimensionality. Color is kind of like that sweet sugar added on top of an already really good-looking dessert. In fact, when you take an illustration like this one by the wonderful Mike Azevedo, who is an artist known for his use of color, and you separate the color and the values, this is what you have. Color is completely dependent on the underlying value. Otherwise, it's a mess of hues and differing levels of saturation. The colors might look nice together, they might complement each other due to super secret color knowledge that we will go into later, but they don't have any substance to them other than their own hue and how saturated they are. Also, Mike has his own Gumroad tutorial on color, and it's super helpful, so you should definitely go check it out right now. It's right here. You should check it out right here, right now. This is a subject that I wanted to get out of the way early on to help new artists wrap their brains around the concept of color. Although all objects we see reflect some type of color, unless you're colorblind, of course, that's not what an object is made or constructed out of. You have to train your brain slowly over time through observation and application of what you observe to see past the color. Color can really confuse us and make an object appear brighter or darker than it actually is. Understanding the basics to values can help you identify how bright or dark a color might actually be. I know I've started way too many paintings where I didn't realize until a few hours in that a large portion of my painting was either too light or it was too dark. This usually happens because you are considering the colors you're using over the values, and they're playing tricks on your brain. Don't let the colors trick you. You are the master commander. You control the colors, they don't control you. Moving on. Over the course of this video, I'll be talking about every aspect of beginner color theory that I think is important for someone to learn and apply into their work as soon as possible. While I go over all of this, and it will be fun and exciting, and there will probably be some cool stuff that you never knew about color, just remember that values are the substance, the structure of your painting. Color is the flavor. And sometimes there can be a little bit too much flavor. Color theory. All right, let's get to the core of color theory. I'll be naming off various subjects of color and defining them, taking a deep look into each one and try and give you, a potentially fresh artist or artist who maybe already knows a bit about color theory, a wider view of color. By the end of all this, I hope that you take color seriously and take the time to experiment with your colors before jumping into your next illustration. If there's anything I don't see enough of, it's people planning out their colors. But anyway, let's get into it. Color wheel. The first thing to talk about is, of course, the color wheel. There's a thing in art, and it's a wheel of color. The color wheel is a perfectly balanced representation of the major colors in the spectrum of colors that we see. And unfortunately, they aren't always the same. In the modern day, there are 3 major color wheels that you'll probably hear about the most. There's RYB, RGB, and CMYK. All of these color wheels have the same colors within them, some just use different methods for color mixing. But that's stuff that you honestly probably don't need to worry about anytime soon, or ever. Let's go with ever, assuming that you have a digital background. All you need to know is that when working traditionally, you're using RYB, when working digitally, you're using RGB, and when working with printing in mind, you're using CMYK. RYB stands for red, yellow, blue, RGB stands for red, green, and blue, and CMYK stands for cyan, magenta, yellow, and key, which means black, basically. So these colors that they represent are what are known as the primary colors. All colors within these color wheels can be made by combining the primary colors with another color. For instance, to create what are called the secondary colors, you'd combine each primary with another. So for RYB, if you combine red and yellow, you'll get orange. That's a secondary color. Yellow and blue create green, and blue and red create violet. Knowing the placement of these colors will be very, very important when we discuss color schemes later on in the video. So take the time that you need to learn your medium's color wheel and to understand its primary and its secondary colors very well. Hue. Hue is what color something is. Yeah, that sounds simple, but that's basically it. So there is a spectrum of color that we can see. I mentioned this just before when talking about color wheels. The primary and the secondary colors, these are the major colors that our brains can pick up on. Now, there are endless hues between each of these as well. So if we consider the average color wheel that you'd see in a digital program like Photoshop, this outer area would be your hue. It's a seamless array of colors transferring into one another. Hue itself isn't necessarily something that you can master. It's only something that you can practice observing and recognizing. Knowing what hue something is at just a glance and then being able to replicate it. Hue is only a small part to the larger picture, like the next subject, saturation. Saturation is the purity of a color. What I mean by that is there are many variations of the color blue, for instance. There is blue at its purest or most saturated form, and then there is blue at one of its weakest purities. And there are many transitions between those points. Saturation is a much harder thing to grasp than hue. It's easy to know what kind of a color we want to paint, but it's hard knowing how we want to paint it. And that's what saturation is really. It's how can I show this hue in my painting without it coming off too strong? Learning when to desaturate is something that takes a lot of practice, and it's tougher knowing that it varies from painting to painting. As unfortunately complicated as it sounds, the saturation of one color depends on the saturation of another. Not all colors can have equal saturation, or else the painting would feel pretty chaotic and unbalanced. Other colors have to step aside on saturation to help other colors stand out. And this is all stuff that we will cover further on in the video. For now, just understand that saturation is, in basic terms, how gray a color is versus it at its purest form. Local color. This one's pretty simple. It's the color of the object that you are painting if there were a completely even neutral light shining on it. You can look at most objects and say, hey, that's yellow, or that's purple, that's the local color. Just try to remember that it's not quite as simple as calling something out and saying it's orange. You need to consider the saturation now too. Is it a grayish orange? How saturated is the orange? Is it more of a darker in value, but high saturated orange, making it brownish? The majority of the time when light is involved, an object will not be painted purely like its local color. It may appear like its local color, but small shifts in hue and saturation will almost always occur. Color temperature. Color temperature is referring to a theory of splitting the color wheel in half. One side is dedicated to the cool colors, the other side is dedicated to the warm colors. Cool colors consist of the green, blue, and purple, while warm colors are made up by yellow, orange, and red. These color groupings have varying psychological effects on our brains. Warm colors kind of make us think of fire and danger and action, while cool colors usually make us think of more calming things like water, nighttime, etc. The reason color temperature should be defined is primarily to help explain this next portion of color theory, and it's arguably the most important. One of the biggest rules to color theory is this: if you have a warm light source, you will have cool shadows. If you have a cool light source, you will have warm shadows. A warm light being the sun, any average yellow desk lamp, firelight, etc. Cool light being bright blue ambient light from the sky, your average white fluorescent light, stuff like that. Now, this doesn't mean that just because you're painting a person in sunlight that all of a sudden their shadows become this saturated blue, even if you do have the correct values in place. What this is referring to is color relativity. A cool shadow isn't necessarily a literal cool color, but more of the inference of a cool color. So if we take a head like this one and add a shadow to it like this, it will look flat. There's no change in color, no hue shifting, nothing. But if all we do is take this same color, shift its hue slightly towards the cool colors, and to saturate it, it will appear to be more of a cool color. This is the case even if there isn't a cool colored ambient light shining in on the shadow. So even if there was a warm light creeping into the shadows from a surrounding area, it would still appear cooler compared to the light. Our brains naturally add contrast to things that there might not be real contrast in. I think this is why studying from observation in life is a little bit more crucial to studying from photos. Both work, don't get me wrong, but there are subtle changes in colors that you won't see in a photo just due to how a camera captures colors versus how our eyes capture them. Color relativity. Color relativity is the theory in that if one color is used in a particular area, it will appear to be a different color than when it is alone. So you may have seen these type of things on the internet of, oh my god, can you believe these are the same colors? With two swatches of the same color used on top of different colors. That's basically what I'm referring to here. But the reason that this is so important is because we can use this theory to our advantage to help make the colors throughout a three-dimensional form feel more natural and harmonious. Look at this example I've drawn up, for instance. In this example, I have two different swatches of color. One is a desaturated orange, the other is a desaturated blue. But when these two different swatches are placed on top of colors that are near them on the color wheel, they both appear to become the same shade of gray. Or at the very least, they're incredibly similar. However, when they're placed off of these colors and they're set side by side each other, you can clearly see the difference between the two. This is because colors can play tricks on us. They can make portions of an image appear brighter or darker. They can make one color look like a completely different color, etc. In this example, you can see I've used a swatch of pure gray on top of a combination of warm colors and on a combination of cool colors. The gray will generally appear as a cooler color on top of the warm colors and will appear as a warmer color on top of the cool colors. The other strange thing that color can do is change our perception of the values in an image. In this example, I've used the same swatch of a saturated teal on top of the previous warm and cool color combinations. But the teal swatch pops off of the warm colors so much more, making it appear brighter and as if it has more contrast in its values than the comparison of it with the cool colors. But if we pull up this same exact image, but just bring it into grayscale, then we can clearly see that the contrast is practically identical. And the only difference in the two combination of colors is the contrast between warm and cool, or the lack of contrast with nothing but cool colors on top of each other. You can see the exact same results if we were to take this same example, but we reverse the process and we place a warm swatch of color inside both color combinations. Color relativity is a very weird thing to try and grasp. I think some of the best uses of it, though, would probably be in movies. Next time that you're watching a movie and the scene is heavily blue or orange or something, try to look at the image critically and ask yourself if the colors you're really looking at are their actual local colors, or do they only appear that way to you because of the surrounding colors? Color and the form principle. Color can change more than you might expect from its local color when affected by certain light sources. But luckily, that's pretty much all that changes color realistically. If you change the color of the main light source of an object, naturally color relativity and temperature will take place and the shadow will appear as a slightly different hue or saturation. Every aspect of the form principle has to change according to the light source as well. So the highlight will change, the center light, halftone, etc. Because there is now a different color with a different level of purity shining on the object. So let's use this ball as an example. If we just tacked some orange color on top of this sphere, it'll look something like this, which isn't very accurate. It might look fine to start, but colors aren't that bare. The values are carrying the majority of this painting at the moment, and the colors are pretty lifeless. So I'll go over what we can do to make the colors pop and feel more realistic. So let's say that this orange ball is being lit by a warm light. If that's the case, let's intensify the color in the light side, and let's tone down the saturation in the shadow side to follow the warm light, cool shadows rule. If you watch the values video, you'll remember that within the shadow, we still have our reflected light though. The color of the reflected light depends entirely on the color of the object that is bouncing that light into the object. So if we had this orange ball on a red desk, it'd appear to be a warm red bouncing into the shadow. If the desk was blue, we'd have a blue light bouncing into the shadow. All these elements are used to make this orange ball still realistically be an orange ball when you look at it, but it is a combination of a couple hues and many levels of saturation. The only time where you may have a less vibrant and colorful object is in overcast lighting. Overcast lighting is traditionally seen as this universal light for making something be as true to its natural color as possible. It's commonly a bright, grayish light being diffused by the clouds above us, allowing light to enter into most areas of an object. So now that we've taken a look at the orange sphere in warm lighting, let's take a look at it in cool lighting to see how much of a difference it makes. You can see now that the orange in the light side is more desaturated and the shadow side is almost fully saturated. Everything on the light side adjusts towards the color of the light source. Then our eyes react to the adjustment and fill the surrounding shaded areas with the opposite color temperature to balance it out. If you actually take a look at the colors in the orange ball with the blue reflected light, the reflected light in the ball isn't even blue. The majority of it is a desaturated red-orange. That's because the less saturated that a specific hue gets, the closer it's going to look to be its complementary color, which is a topic we will touch on in a little bit. But for now, there's only one last thing to talk about in this section of the video. Colors from life versus photos. There is a reason that even after the internet gave us an infinite amount of naked people to draw and paint for absolutely free, that life drawing is still being done by art schools and galleries all over the world. It's because photos can't capture everything. There's a significant difference between capturing something realistically and capturing something that looks like a photo. The most painting from life that I've done are small setups that I made on my desk with a single desk lamp, some random objects, and a tablecloth. But even from those small studies, I've noticed a huge change in how I perceive color. I'll see a full spectrum of colors in person versus in a photo. I'll see purplish hues and greenish hues and spots I would have never imagined seeing those colors. Photos also have a tendency to tone down the intensity of light or the simplification of shadow. I never quite understood the idea of shape welding, which I discussed in the values episode, until I painted things from life. How the light really pops out of you and leaves so much of the shadow up to the imagination. There are lessons and techniques that I think you can only really see and learn from painting something from life. This doesn't mean that you need to break out the oil paints and that you need to start buying canvases or anything. I'm sure that would all be very beneficial, but I've never personally done an oil painting in my entire life. No, all you need is whatever art tools that you have at your disposal and something in front of you. Whether it's a graphite pencil or some crayons, if there's something for you to draw with, there's something for you to do a study from life with. But try to really observe the subtlety in colors, the slight hue and the saturation shifts. Don't be afraid to place a color down that you think you see even though it makes no sense. More often than not, that lack of fear in color placement will only help your paintings, as long as they aren't insanely saturated or something. This is all my personal opinion, of course. Take it or leave it, try it for yourself, whatever you want to do. Color psychology. Our brains work in really weird ways. Before we see something in its full grand scale, maybe it's a painting on the far end of a gallery, we will already have feelings about it. Whether we like it or we dislike it or feel meh about it or whatever, we don't even know the content yet. It's just a weird blob of values and color to us, and we already have a thing that clicks in our heads that says either, I want to go look at that, or, that looks missable. Yes, a large portion of that psychological part of our brain is dedicated to values, but I think a good portion of that is also dedicated to color. I like to think of it kind of like this. Values are what will make people go, wow, that looks so good. And color is what makes people say, wow, that feels so good. When you see a painting with a color scheme that just fits the content beautifully, it makes you feel all nice and fuzzy inside. Seeing something that just looks so juicy, I don't know. I could see the saddest painting in the world of a widow watching her husband being buried, and I could still think, God damn, those colors. They look so good. Different colors will have different interactions with our brains. Certain colors will help influence the thought of a particular emotion. Red is probably the most common color that you see used in this way. Most people think of anger, power, blood, things like that when they see red, but red can also represent lust. Red lipstick, red roses, people blush red when in that heavy Game of Thrones-esque passion. It's a natural color that we see in nature, and our subconscious brings those to light when we see images with heavy uses of red. Every color has their subconscious association with them. Some even have multiple ones. Green, for instance, depending on the brightness or saturation of it, can feel like a healthy, fresh color representing nature blooming, or it can represent sickness or greed. It all kind of depends on its usage. As a general rule of thumb to follow, more often than not, warm colors make us feel excitement and energy, while cool colors are more calming and relaxing. The reason I wanted to go into this before discussing color schemes is because color is what is important. The color scheme just keeps your colors balanced, but the specific colors that you use are what will influence the viewer's feelings. So just keep that in mind. I thought about going over each color psychologically and actually got halfway through them while writing the script before I realized that it's such an ambiguous topic that I'd rather just leave it up to your own discovery. Hearing and seeing how yellow, at its exact same saturation and brightness, can either be a light-hearted happy color or an unnerving cautionary color really made me realize that half of what I'd be spouting is all heavily theoretical and very situational. So take the time to explore some of your favorite movies or paintings and observe the colors used. Think about how they make you feel, what is the scene about, and why were those colors used to represent that scene. Then take that information, steal it, snatch it out of that horribly famous artist who you envy. You envy so much you hate them even. And use what you learned from them in your own work. Never tell a soul. Die with the secret. Let's go over color schemes. Color schemes are the use of one or more colors to create some kind of a visually balanced and aesthetically pleasing image. They can and they should be used in every kind of painting, character design, landscape, whatever it might be. Color schemes work, and there are so many kinds out there that it's almost impossible to not find one that fits the mood that you are shooting for in your painting. Monochromatic. Monochromatic color schemes are ones that strictly use only one color, not similar colors, or slight hue shifts, but still the same general color. Pick a hue and either brighten it or darken it, desaturate or saturate, that's it. Analogous. Analogous color schemes consist of only a small group of colors in one portion of the color wheel. So let's say you have a painting that is primarily green and you want it to feel calming or alive. You can make it an analogous color scheme and introduce yellow and blue into it as well. This is generally why so many of the backgrounds in Miyazaki films feel just so damn nice and calming to us. Complementary. Complementary color schemes are where you would use two colors directly opposite one another in the color wheel. You see this most commonly in the onslaught of blue and orange movie posters. Some of you have probably seen memes poking fun at it already. There are many, many other options for complementary colors though. But yes, blue and orange is an exciting one that works well. Other options would be purple and yellow, red and green, and whatever colors in between those main three examples. When you start playing around with saturation and brightness, you can get a lot of variety from the same exact colors. Split complementary. Split complementary is similar to complementary color schemes. The difference is instead of using the exact opposite of one color, you use its neighbors. So let's use the blue and orange example again. Instead of blue and orange, it'd be orange and teal with violet. Or alternatively, it could be blue with, according to this color wheel, vermilion and amber. God, that's way fancier than just calling it red orange and yellow orange. This doesn't create quite a striking contrast of colors, and it makes it feel a little bit more balanced and harmonized. Personally, this is my absolute favorite color scheme to use in my illustrations and characters, and I didn't even know it was a possible color scheme for a very, very long time. Triadic. Triadic color schemes are pretty straightforward. It consists of three colors perfectly spread out between the color wheel, so the primary colors of red, yellow, and blue make up a triadic color scheme. So do the secondary colors of green, orange, and violet. There are more options in between these, and the options can differ depending on the color wheel you're using, but those are some of the major ones. Tetradic. Tetradic color schemes are the last one we're going to go over. These ones are a little bit more complicated than the others, but not too bad. So we've already gone over complementary colors. Tetradic color schemes are when you combine two complementary color schemes together. So for instance, if you had blue and orange be your first complementary pair, you could combine them with yellow and purple, another complementary pair. The four of those would make up a tetradic color scheme. Another example would be that if instead of yellow and purple, you went with red and green, that would also create a balanced tetradic scheme. With these variations of color schemes and all of the possible color combinations, you should never ever run out of interesting ways to display the color in your images. I think too many beginners forget to go back to these really basic foundations of color theory, and they'll try to do something crazy and exciting, but because they don't know how to control saturation or how to create a balanced color scheme, the whole image just falls apart. The controlling saturation part is something that I really want to bring up actually. When giving feedback to early artists, a common trend I'll see is that a lot of beginning artists will take the time to establish a color scheme, however their colors are incredibly saturated. Saturation can be amazing, but only when used appropriately. Saturation in an image is only special when in contrast to areas of lesser contrast. So you can have that neat complementary color scheme of purple and orange, that's great, but try to find one color to remain the dominant and one the submissive. Let one reign and the other support. Try it out for yourself and experiment though, because as much as I can talk about all of this color theory stuff, it's still just a theory. It should be explored and experimented with. Storytelling through color. So we've talked about color schemes and theories and how to use them, what they are, etc. But some of you might not be limited to the ideas of just single illustrations or character designs. Some of you might want to become storytellers and might be wondering how you can use color to help influence the telling of your story. Whether it's an ongoing comic book, graphic novel, maybe even a series of illustrations. Whatever it might be, color is an amazing storytelling device and should not be passed up or given little thought. So what better example than a Pixar film? Yes, Pixar films are the shit. It's undeniable that their use of color is, as the kids would say, lit AF, fam. So let's start with the beginning of the film. The film opens up to a gorgeous fall morning with insanely vibrant colors. Yellow trees and purple shadows with a really nice teal sky, a perfect triadic color scheme. What's also important in this first scene of the bus full of little kid monsters is that it's set at a lower angle looking up at the bus. This will be important for later. There's a scene where all the kids are getting off of the school bus and little Mike Wazowski is looking for a partner to buddy up with. He comes across a furry blue student, similar to the blue of Sully. The two of them would have made a really nice color scheme that blended well. This kid brushes him off though and finds a different buddy, one with yellow skin, giving them a nice blue and yellow complementary scheme if we're going to go with the RGB color wheel. With no partners to choose, Mike is kind of stuck with the teacher. He's embarrassed by this, like any kid would be. To put emphasis on this embarrassment, they have the teacher and him contrast, being a complementary pink and green, forcing him to stick out because of the contrast. This is a shot that pans up before we cut to a scene within the factory. I just kind of wanted to mention two things here. Again, the really nice triadic color scheme of yellow, teal, and purple, and I also wanted to remind you how vibrant it currently is. This will be called back to in just a little bit. We cut into the factory where all the kids have gathered together and they're about to look out into the scare room. The scene is heavily on the blue side with a little bit of purple shining on the characters near the front. This is another shot that I wanted for comparison later on, just pay attention to the saturation of everything. God dang that purple, ooh! Oh, it's so juicy. That nice soothing purple with some blue, The purple here really gives this scene that magical feel. It's that big reveal, the scare room. It's what Mike has been waiting to see his whole life, and him and the other kids just can't believe how pretty it is. Now, fast forward several years. Mike is arriving in a different bus to his first day of Monsters University. The bus is gray, the world is less saturated and less magical looking. The color scheme is a lot more analogous and mundane. The cars across the street are all gray or blue just to not contrast. Even the angle we view this bus at is higher as opposed to lower. The two scenes being compared perfectly encapsulates how shitty and not magical adult life is. It's such a small touch, but tells a lot with just visuals. And I know the angle that I was discussing before, that's actually more of a compositional tool, but I still think it's really interesting to bring it up here. This shot, essentially the counterpart to looking up at the Monsters, Inc. building, is a lot more tame. Still beautiful, very colorful and pretty, but with a very analogous color scheme. blues, greens, a little yellow but not much. Everything to make something feel more settled and natural, less magical and new. Hell, I mean, even look at this scene of Mike getting off the bus. Everything is so gray and toned down compared to the childhood shots. Here is a counterpart scene to that first scene of the kids seeing the inside of Monsters, Inc. Before, everything was dark and mysterious. The blue and the purple only emphasized that. Now, Mike is an adult and knows more about life. The mystery and the intrigue just was sucked out of him. He's essentially not in the dark, if you want to put it like that. The scene is lit with a bright, almost colorless light. See, stories can be told with just still images and a good use of color. Color can be used as the major tool or play more of a support role to the main story. Either way, it will help you express your intent. So I have a few more examples, but these are more dedicated to the characters themselves and how their colors interact with one another and what that can tell us about their involvement in the story. This is Mike and Randall's first interaction in Monsters University. In the movie, they begin as friends and roommates, but of course we know by watching Monsters, Inc. that Randall is the eventual antagonist. Randall's naturally an antagonist to Mike with his instant contrast to Mike's green skin. Their complementary scheme implies a sense of competition or contrast in character or personality. Here, however, we can see Mike and Sully having their first one-on-one interaction in the movie. We can see here that the hue of Mike and Sully combine to create a split complementary scheme. The difference between a complementary scheme and a split complementary scheme is that a split complementary is more balanced and harmonious, whereas Randall is the complete opposite of Mike and therefore is his nemesis. So here's a scene where Mike and Sully go out to meet with fraternities about potentially joining them. They give the main fraternity house a bold red and yellow to help show how powerful they are, two strong warm colors. The teal of Sully is a complementary color to the red, making him stand out amongst them the most. Mike actually has no color relation to these guys, which for a while kind of boggled my mind a bit as to how they wouldn't have them interact with him color-wise. That being said, in just the next scene, the frat leader gestures towards the fraternity he thinks Mike should join, the losers of the school. And sure enough, it's green and yellow, where he would fit right in. So I hope this gave you all a good glimpse at how color can be used for your storytelling. Whether it's making viewers subconsciously feel like someone is a future antagonist, or making two friends feel like they match one another in a world, color can be used for all of that. Studying techniques. We're finally nearing the end here. I hope this info will be useful for some of you out there. The majority of what we've discussed in this video, color schemes, color theory, storytelling through color, etc., will more than likely need to be explored through personal experience and practice and application. Try to take some of what I've discussed and directly apply it into your work, or at least consider this knowledge when in the early stages of developing an image. A few things that I do think are possible to directly study to improve on are some of the aspects of color theory that were mentioned earlier in the video. Hue, saturation, color relativity, and local color. All of those things are something that people's eyes aren't generally accustomed to seeing and needing to identify immediately on any given color wheel. So there are a few things that I take into consideration when doing a color-focused study. First of all, make sure that the study you're doing is about color. It's hard enough studying color alone, so to try and study color and anatomy and values, etc., can be very tricky. So the majority of my color studies are done when I'm creating a new illustration and want some inspiration. I usually go to a website like animationscreencaps.com, or if it's for an image that requires a little more realistic use of color, I'll generally hunt down some screen caps from Game of Thrones or something, and I'll try and paint from reference. After you make sure your focus is on color, what I personally try to do is take a brush that has no opacity feature on it, take my hand away from whatever color picker shortcut key I generally use, and start the brutal task of trying my best to match each color, hue, saturation, value, and all of that with every single brush stroke. It's agonizing. So I will usually do a very rough drawing at first, so I'm not also having to concern myself with adjusting the drawing later on. So try your best, really focus on what color you think that you see, what that color looks like in relation to the surrounding colors, what the overall color filter is on the scene, etc. Finally, after I've blocked the majority of the image in the flat colors that I think are fairly accurate to the reference image, I then color pick my colors and I compare them with the colors in the reference image. As a side note, generally I give myself a 30 to 60 minute time limit so I don't get caught up in the small details and I stay very focused. After comparing the colors, I try to make any observations I can think of. How are my hues different? Are my colors too saturated? Not saturated enough? Am I considering color relativity enough in my decision making? Etc. Any observation like this that I make, I try to jot down a little note or two just to help me remember. And seriously, I can't stress that step enough. Notes have helped me a ton. And that's it. That exercise has improved my eye for color quite a bit over the years. Early on, I would try to do at least one study like this every new portfolio piece I worked on top of the other specific studies for the image. And it always made me way more confident in choosing my colors in an image. Developing an eye for hue, saturation, temperature, etc. is so important when it comes to considering how you're going to approach your color schemes in an image, and are even more important for maintaining that approach you set out for and don't have it deviate from your initial plans. Nothing is worse than doing some rough colors for an illustration, getting it to a really good place that you're happy with, but then when the painting process starts, you just can't quite get that same feel with the final colors. It happens to everyone. Don't worry about it. Just remember, if this happens to you, to follow what we discussed in this video. If the colors are looking incorrect to you, just do the following. Check the values. The values are always going to be more important than the colors. Incorrect values will have your image looking anywhere from washed out to chaotic and harsh on the eyes. Adjusting these will usually be the quickest fix. 2. Check the color temperatures. The simplest rule of color is that if it's a cool light, there will be a warm shadow, and a warm light will have a cool shadow. A lot of early artists will forget about this, or they'll just remain really tame with their decision making, either by having a consistent hue and saturation throughout both light and shadow, or by only adjusting the saturation slightly in either the light or shadow. Don't be afraid to be bold. Color is meant to be playful and expressive. Don't be nervous to shift the hues more or play with higher or lower saturation. Generally, if you remain within the confines of the 2 rules, 1, good values, 2, accurate color temperatures, your colors will still read very naturally and not be off-putting. So, thank you for purchasing this video. I hope that you got something out of it, whether it's a lot or a little, whatever, I hope you got something from it. I really appreciate the support that everyone has been giving me for these videos, and I hope to make more of these in the future. For now, if you're interested, the next episode in the series is going to be on perspective. So hopefully I'll talk to you again there for hours and hours and hours. All right, bye.